นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ One of the ways we talk about the practice of Dhamma, the Buddhist path, is we're cultivating Samma Ditti, right view. Or even another way of saying it is cultivating wisdom, understanding. You'll notice the first sermon or main talk that the Buddha gave after his enlightenment, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. The very first thing he talked about in that was to point out the danger of going to extremes and seeking happiness in the wrong way or the wrong place. You could say practicing without right view, practicing without wisdom, understanding. He pointed out the danger that most people are living their lives seeking happiness, equating happiness with the highest goals that human beings can achieve. So usually we say sensual happiness, pleasures of the senses, and material happiness. So having the ability to satisfy our senses, the best, most pleasurable experiences humans can have, seeing that as the highest happiness, as the goal of life, to get as much pleasure, happiness as we can have. We pointed out that there's a lot of drawbacks to that because sensual happiness doesn't last. The most beautiful sights, sounds, smell, taste, touch can bring us pleasure, but it doesn't last. It's impermanent, temporary. The other extreme, humans tend to go towards less popular, less fashionable, but nevertheless it's one that keeps cropping up in human behavior, is seeking liberation, you could say, through self-harm, asceticism, what we call self-mortification, kind of like punishing oneself, taking on very extreme ascetic practices in the hope or the belief that they'll pacify the mind, take away suffering from our mind. So one way is to basically intoxicate oneself, to kind of blot out suffering and try and get away from any experience of suffering by indulging in pleasure as much as possible and of the most refined, best ways possible. The other is through extreme asceticism, trying to push one's way, pushing the body, pressurizing the body to the point where we somehow go beyond all kinds of suffering. But neither way works. So the Buddha went on to teach the middle way, the Majjhima Patipata. And that's one way we talk about the practice of Buddhism, cultivation of the middle way. And the middle way has to be supported by right view or wisdom, sammaditi. So we compare that to like the lantern that shines the way through the darkness when you're walking at night. Certainly in the old days, people used to use a lantern before electricity and street lights and everything. You'd carry some form of lantern and it shows you the way through the forest or along the road. And with right view present, then your thinking, your understanding, actions and speech, all your efforts, the way you direct your mind and cultivate mindfulness and develop concentration, always with a purpose, and the purpose of ending stress and suffering, which is the purpose of the Buddhist teachings. But we need the right view to kind of direct us in that way, in the right direction, push us in the right direction, or guide us in the right direction. So the Buddha emphasized the importance of cultivating right view because it will guide our practice at every stage, at every step, whatever aspect of the practice we're developing, we need the right view. Whether you're practicing dana, generosity, you need to have the right view to understand what you're aiming at, why you do it, what you're aiming at. And so many people talk about how they've been brought up to practice dana, the practice of charity, generosity, giving, as a method to obtain other things. You give away one thing to gain something else. And so when people practice dana, generosity with monks, or they do an act of charity, or they go and help somebody, all of which is a good thing, but then they, at the same time in their mind, maybe they're doing it to get something else, get a better life, get rich, recover from illness, to attain a good rebirth, to become famous, powerful, beautiful. There's a lot of requests go on secretly in people's minds when they're practicing generosity. When the Buddha pointed out, well, just the simple practice of generosity is not done to gain things, it's done to let go of attachment, let go of stinginess, possessiveness. Because true happiness is going to come through letting go of craving and attachment. So just the practice of generosity already requires the light of wisdom guiding it to be successful and to be following the Buddha's teaching. That's something we have to ask ourselves every day. Most people understand about practice of generosity and helping others, see it as a good thing. But we also have to look more deeply at our deeper motivation and what's going on in the mind when you do these things. What are you seeking in return for the generosity you practice? Sometimes we even do it for competitive reasons. You're trying to outdo someone else, get the better of them, be bigger and better. The telltale signs of when we lose our right view and our right understanding in the practice of generosity is, well, when it might start to bring up suffering, such as when you're doing it to further some part of the sense of self, the ego, some desire, some attachment. So if you don't get what you want, then you might get frustrated. So you offer this dana, practice this charity, but then if you don't get what you want, you might feel disappointed or annoyed, or feel, well, why did I do all that? If I'm not getting what I want, what's the point? So suffering may arise even in offering charity or dana. even helping somebody can turn into suffering when you got the wrong attitude or don't have right view. And it goes on with the rest of our practice. We're keeping precepts to, again, stop us from creating suffering and to reduce certain negative mental qualities, mental defilements from the mind. So the defilement that would lead you to kill, to steal, to commit acts of sexual misconduct and so on. You're training yourself to give up those intentions, to free your mind from those intentions. But at the same time, sometimes other desires and motivations slip in. So you keep precepts. Sometimes it's more of a bargain, isn't it? You're making a bargain maybe with the gods or the Buddha or yourself or somebody else. So I'll keep these precepts. I'll be a good person and I won't harm anyone. And in return, I want that job. I want that bit of success that life can give me. I want to get rich. I want something. I want to get better from my disease, from my illness, recover from something. So just the same way as practicing generosity, practicing sila can also be undermined by the sense of self creeping in, and certain desires and even selfishness can come into it, albeit of a subtle nature. Maybe keeping the precepts is always a good thing. If you have the discipline, the restraint not to harm others, that's a good thing. But you also have to look at that deeper sense of self that may form around the practice of precepts, morality. And the same with meditation. When we meditate, we're cultivating further aspects of the path, mindfulness, wisdom, insight, to remove mental defilements of greed, anger, and delusion from our mind. And yet we still sometimes are practicing with a lot of desire. Maybe just desire for some kind of special bliss, happiness. Again, going back to that, being stuck in happiness. Maybe you've seen some of the drawbacks of sensual desire, just going about your business, living in the world, trying to get as much pleasure and money and success as you can. Maybe you've seen through that a bit, seen how uncertain worldly pleasure and success is, how it can't give you lasting satisfaction. Maybe you've already noticed that. And that may be one reason why you come to practice meditation and listen to the Dhamma. You're looking for something more deeply satisfying. But still, that old way of thinking might sneak back in when you're meditating. So you do some meditation, you say, well, I've done my meditation and I want this or that in return. I want to feel good, feel blissful, feel happy. I want to get rid of all my negative thoughts. Don't want any stress, any negativity. Maybe I just want to be a better person, impress my friends. Sometimes people want, they want to be able to read minds or see the future or see beings in other realms or something. All these more subtle desires can still slip in even to meditation when we lose our right view or our wisdom and understanding. So at every stage of the path, dana, sila, bhavana, generosity, morality, meditation, we need right view guiding what we're doing. And the right view comes from listening to the Dhamma, reflecting on the Dhamma, reflecting on what we're doing to see whether we're still following what the Buddha taught. Because in the beginning, we don't even know that the Buddha, what it means to be enlightened. We can only take his words on trust. But the way to go beyond that is practice until you're not just believing the word of the Buddha, but you're knowing for yourself, experiencing for yourself. And then your faith becomes faith based on personal experience, personal effort in the practice, rather than just on the word of the Buddha alone. Still believe in the word of the Buddha, but now you can say, well, my own personal experience matches what the Buddha said. That's your goal. Well, our teacher Ajahn Chah always used to say, we're practicing to develop right view, understanding of suffering, what its causes are, and how to end it. That's really what we're doing in Dhamma practice. It's always for the ending of suffering, not for creating further suffering. When you notice when desires and wanting slips into any aspect of your practice, well, that's where suffering starts to arise, doesn't it? Whenever there's wanting, you want something. You practice generosity because you want something. Keep the precepts because you want something. Meditate because you want something. It's the wanting that is the cause of suffering. The generosity, the precepts, the meditation are still the vehicle for attaining nibbana, enlightenment. But the wanting that slips into what you're doing is where we run into obstacles. It's where Mara lurks. Mara means obstacles and difficulties and obstructions in the practice. It's our own wanting. This is something you have to keep returning to in your practice, I think, what I've found. Because our habit from the past, say before we really put the Buddhist teachings into practice, we tend to blame external things for our problems and our obstacles in life, all the difficulties. Usually it's another person or an external situation. We're not seeing it's our own wanting that is the problem. So a lot of our practice is about coming back to reflect on our state of mind and observe where the wanting is, where it's coming up. You really don't have to look very far, because wherever there's some mental agitation, stress, tension, dissatisfaction, that's where you'll find the wanting. And that's where you have to look. But it's the hardest place to look, because wanting, naturally, it moves the mind, it agitates the mind. Lots of negative emotions and thoughts come up when there's wanting. And the more wanting and craving there is, the more the mind moves. So part of our practice is learning to still the mind, quieten the mind down. That's what we were doing just before this talk. We were practicing a bit of mindfulness of breathing to quieten down. And when you practice meditation, you're usually using a posture that's fairly calming and peaceful. So either you're sitting still, or even if you're walking back and forth doing walking meditation, it's a fairly passive kind of posture. Even as you are moving, you're walking, but you're just walking back and forth, not going anywhere, not doing anything. So we say going nowhere, doing nothing. And what you do with your mind is just get used to putting your attention on something very ordinary, such as the breath or the feeling of your feet touching the ground. I mean, you can't get an experience more ordinary than just one breath in, one breath out. Very ordinary, even you might say boring. Or watching your feet arise and touch down on the ground. In what can be more ordinary than just observing one foot following another, walking back and forth. But the whole point is that ordinary activity and putting your attention on it, becoming familiar and observing the ordinary, will expose what's not ordinary. And that's the wanting and the desiring that agitates the mind and causes a suffering. the ordinary mind that is peaceful, mindful, and has right view is not suffering. So when you're suffering in life, it means you're with the extraordinary or the out of the ordinary, or you could even say the abnormal mind. And that's kind of telling you something is wrong. I need to go back to the ordinary, back to the breath, back to mindfulness, back to my feet pacing up and down, back to the stillness of the mind. You know, stress and suffering is the movement and mental agitation of the mind, endless thinking, desiring, wanting, planning, trying to get rid of what we don't like, trying to get what we do like. It's the opposite of stillness. It's movement. You notice when the stress and suffering is extreme, you can't even sit still, can you? Physically, you start to move. You get agitated. Have you ever noticed that when you meditate? Say you're sitting there watching the breath, but then a thought or a stream of thoughts come up, maybe about some painful experience, some unpleasant memory, or some anxiety about something you're facing in your life, perhaps. And you get a reaction in the body as well as the mind. Maybe your hands move. Maybe your heart beats a little bit more strongly. Maybe your muscles tense in one part of the body. It's because you're no longer with just the ordinary and the stillness of the mind and body. Now your mind is reacting. So you get physical symptoms of that reaction. And of course, mental activity, you get thinking. And negative thinking is much more agitating than more positive, wholesome thinking. So as you get caught into what negative thinking, mental defilements, you know, they really move the mind. The thoughts increase, seem to speed up, you might say. They speed up, more agitating, and they're accompanied by more unpleasant feeling as well. So you may get stronger emotional reactions, the more stress, the more suffering you have. It's the opposite of stillness. Still, if you're practicing meditation, you learn from that. You start to see suffering as it's arising. And you can know it as suffering. Sometimes that's all you have to do. You just observe your own mind getting what I used to say in England, getting in a tizzy, getting all frustrated or getting caught up in a whole turmoil of thinking. You notice that. You may not be able to stop it yet because it's so powerful, but you can notice it. And part of meditation is just observing the way things are, and you notice trains of thought accompanied by wanting, desiring, wanting to get rid of, are not peaceful. They agitate the mind. You're not happy. You're not at peace. And the more refined your awareness, the clearer your mind is, the stronger the mindfulness, the more it exposes that. So this is why we encourage you to practice meditation every day, if only for a short period. Because every time you return to your own mind and develop a little bit of more mindfulness, more stillness, it helps you to see what is not still, what is agitating. And that's a form of self-education, self-learning. As I said, we tend to introduce new wanting and desiring into our meditation. So perhaps you have some mental agitation coming up as you meditate. But the first reaction usually is, I want to get rid of this. So you're back with desire and wanting again. So you have to catch that. It's like you're like walking through, you know, most of us have never walked through a minefield, but it's like if you were to walk through a minefield, you've got to be very careful where you tread, because there's always the next thing ready to blow up in your face. You get some wanting coming up in your mind, you experience some desire, you see it, and then you might get another moment where you say, I don't want this wanting. And it's one thing after another. And sometimes meditation can seem like hard work, and that's true. Nobody got to enlightenment the easy way. There's no such thing. We all want the easy way, but that's back with wanting, and the wanting mind cannot do it, cannot bring you wisdom, understanding, or peace. We can't achieve that just through wanting. It'll do the opposite. It will bring you to disappointment, frustration, suffering. So as you practice mindfulness and observe more closely your mind, you will see these different moments of wanting, desiring, wanting to get rid of. And you have to be on your guard, because then you'll get wanting to get rid of the not wanting, or wanting to get rid of the wanting, and on it goes. And you just get caught up in this cycle of wanting, not wanting, dissatisfaction, until sometimes you just give up in frustration. And I've never met a meditator who hasn't at least once or twice, and probably many times, out of frustration, just abandoned their meditation. It was too difficult. But really, that's what's going on, isn't it? In one form or another. The wanting overwhelms you. And most people who have stuck with their meditation, maybe over periods of months, years, many years, this will be something they've learned from and understood. It's that you really have to face the mind that is not peaceful, the mind of wanting and desiring, and learn from it. Learn to go beyond it, see through it. In the end, just to be able to be still enough to see a want, a desire come up and pass away again, until it dissolves into nothing. And you can subtly go, aha, it's impermanent. And what's impermanent is not me, it's not mine, it's not myself. It was just another bit of wanting. Every time you do that, it's like another unit of wanting is abandoned from your mind. Another little bit of dust is cleaned up from your mind. Your mind goes clearer. Lumpur Cha used to say, the mind, when you start meditation, it's like a cup full of dirty water. You can't drink dirty water because it will give you disease, or it'll taste awful. You have to throw it out. The mind itself is like a vessel. It's like an empty cup. But through our life, we've been not very mindful. We didn't have right view, right understanding. So maybe for many years, we've been filling our vessel, our cup up with all kinds of desires and attachments. When you start meditating, it's like suddenly you're seeing what you've been doing, the mistakes you've been making. So it can be quite confronting and hard work. You have to be very patient and have a lot of goodwill, compassion for yourself. But you have no choice but to just start bailing out. You get your scoop and start bailing out the dirty water, or tipping the glass so it can pouring it away. A lot of meditation is like that, especially in the beginning. There's just so much dirty water there. You have to just bail it out, pots and pots and pots of it. You have to be very patient, put a lot of effort in, but keep going. But of course, if you keep going, one day the water will be finished. It'll be gone. As long as you keep practicing. Unfortunately, what we sometimes do is call a halt to the practice. We call a ceasefire in our own mind. And then we start, instead of taking the dirty water out, we start putting dirty water back in without realizing. And then next time you take up the practice again, you realize, oh, everything slipped back so far. And you might feel despondent because, oh, I've got to start again, back to square one. So best is not to give it up. Just keep going and develop this quality of being willing to practice with your mind, whether it's full of desire or there's very little desire. It doesn't matter. You feel like doing it or you don't. You just keep going. And developing this ability to keep coming back to the present moment, to the breath, to the foot on the ground, these moments of mindfulness, and joining them up. Because that's where we gain more of this detached awareness, the equanimity that helps us to see wanting for what it is. It's nothing. It's just delusions of mind and the cause of suffering. And if you see something as the cause of suffering, you will be willing to let it go. But you have to keep coming back to this place of detached knowing or detached awareness, where you just see it for what it is rather than getting lost in it and going with it. And that's why regular meditation practice is so valuable. It'll help you improve that mental muscle, that ability just to know thoughts and feelings and memories, but not get triggered by them so much, not get lost in them so much. Just to know them and allow them to rise, pass away. They can't really bother you very much. So then you have a more like you have your own safe space in your mind. If you've been practicing meditation for a while, you probably agree that your mind can either be your best friend when you're looking after it and training it well, or it's your worst enemy. And this is totally independent of what else is going on in the world. We spend so much of our time thinking, looking, talking about the rest of the world and all the problems of the world that we miss our own mind. But really our experience of peace or lack of peace, happiness and suffering is internal, isn't it? And even if the world is in a turmoil and in a mess, you can still be peaceful within the middle of it. Or maybe your world is actually very comfortable and peaceful and good environment, and yet you're in a turmoil because you haven't been looking after your mind. And they're quite often out of sync, aren't they? Because if we don't train our mind, then even in the most blissful, happy place, good situation, we can make a mess of it, end up very unhappy. So the Buddha was encouraging us to develop this right view to guide us, to see where we may be going wrong, attaching to one extreme, either just endlessly seeking pleasure that can never satisfy us, or attaching to things that cause us pain and suffering, which obviously won't satisfy us. Try to develop this quality of the mind in the middle way, mindfulness, knowing and reflecting on experience, so you're not attached to the desire, but you're abandoning desire. That's our aim. Your desire, another way we talk about it is like the pet. You keep feeding the pet. Well, not even a pet. A pet you've accepted, if you own a pet, you've accepted you own a pet. More like a stray cat, a stray dog. Or if you live in the forest, maybe a stray parrot. Well, anyway, a stray animal or bird, if you keep feeding it, it'll keep coming back. Desire, wanting, the agitated mind, the suffering mind will keep returning if you keep feeding it. Why do we keep feeding it, and how do we keep feeding it? Well, because of our lack of understanding, lack of right view, and lack of mindfulness. Maybe just out of habit, because we've done it before, we'll do it again. Maybe out of wrong understanding, wrong view. But if we're not aware, we just keep feeding desire, don't we? Keep thinking, if I get this, I'll be happy. So we're wanting all kinds of things. And then reacting to unpleasant, painful situations with not wanting to get rid of. That's where we feed desire, feed the stray cat, the stray dog. Of course, it will keep returning. It becomes mental channels or pathways, habits of mind that just happen whether we know about it or not, whether we like it or not. And you'll notice that part of meditation as you're waking up, you realize how much of the time you're just working on habit. When you establish mindfulness, sometimes those habits, those mental habits, seems really weird because you say there's like one, your mind splits into two, you could say, and there's part of the mind watching, that's the mind of mindfulness and stillness. Then there's the thing being watched, and maybe it's just a mental habit reacting with desire, anger, frustration, jealousy, whatever. It's coming up in the mind, but now your mind splits, and there's the part that's just watching. And then there's the mood, the thought itself. But rather than just going with it, because when you're going with it, meaning you attach to it, you get lost in it, you have no awareness. So your mind is not splitting. So you're just stuck in it. You don't even realize it. But as you practice mindfulness, it's like your mind splits. And you can see, you maybe still have these power of your old karma bringing up these desires, but now you can look at them, observe them. This is like an insight into not self. You say, this is a certain way of reacting to a situation or a thought or memory, it pops up. But now you have enough mindfulness, you can say, this is not really me, it's just a mental habit. It may have come up a million times before, but still it's something that just arises and passes away according to its own set of conditions. You see something or you remember something, you hear something, and you react. But now when you establish mindfulness, this split or separation in the mind gives you this strange, unusual, new feeling where you say, there's this mood of desire, wanting, or anguish, not wanting. But you don't feel it like it's part of you. You're just observing it. And that's what gives you the chance to actually let go. Because if you feel like it's not part of you, well, then you can let it go. It's a bit like when you have a haircut. You cut your hair or someone cuts your hair for you. Once the hair leaves the head, you don't really feel attached to it anymore. It's like you don't give it a second thought. You just let it go onto the ground or whatever, and it's gone. This internal practice of mindfulness and stillness that you then turn to reflect on your experience, it's the same thing. You see a thought or an emotion, just like hair that's been cut from the head. It doesn't matter anymore. You can let it go. The more you do that, the less it will come up, the less often and the less strong. I guess in that sense, it's not necessarily the same as hair. If you keep seeing your hair is not self, it doesn't mean to say you're going to go bald, but it may do. Or maybe you just come like me and you end up as a monk and shave your head. But your thoughts and your negative emotions you can see as not self, and they'll stop coming up. I guess you could say your mind goes bald. Bald from wanting and desiring, which is a good thing. If you have no more mental agitation and stress, no more desires, no more wanting, you're free. That's a good thing. So in that sense, the baldness of the mind is free, is good. But that has to take place through a certain action, doesn't it? There has to be right view. You're kind of looking and observing with the eye of Dhamma. Then you establish awareness, mindfulness, and that takes some effort, bring up the mindfulness. Then you look at your own mental experience and you see a thought as just a thought. Feeling, just a feeling. Memory is just a memory. And there's this split in the mind between the mind that knows and the thing that is known. And if this split takes place, even if only briefly, what happens? Well, the thing that is known, the thought, the memory, the feeling, just kind of heads off into and disappears, finishes, because it's impermanent, it's temporary. And you're seeing that. So like a fork in a road, and the left fork or one fork, the left fork is where all the stuff you're observing and witnessing goes, and it just disappears into nothingness, finishes. The desires, the wantings, the attachments just goes there and ends. But then another part of the fork, the other fork, is the mind that knows, and that's what's left. If you keep practicing, rather than always falling into the mind of wanting and desiring, you stay more with the mind that is just knowing, that can see or know mind thoughts and feelings as just phenomena arising, passing away. They all have that thing in common. They're all impermanent. You know, every thought, however high and refined or low and gross, good or bad, they arise, they cease. When you split your mind in this way, then you can see that, you can know that, you can let go. And you're avoiding the landmines because you're not creating further suffering by reacting to that desire that you just saw that made you annoyed or angry, upset for having a desire. Or you're not getting caught into the desire to want a peaceful mind, to want to be happy, peaceful, which is also agitating. You know, with this place we say of equanimity, detached awareness, or just knowing things without adding on, no add-ons. It's the best place to be if you believe the Buddha. Of course, you have to prove that for yourself through your own practice. But it's the highest Dhamma, the Dhamma of equanimity. It's a very rare quality in the world. Why is the world in a mess? Because people lack detached awareness. They lack right view. They lack detached awareness. They haven't practiced the Dhamma very much. That's why we encourage everyone to practice more, do more of this, because it will bring up more equanimity, and from that you gain peace. It's the most useful thing for you as an individual, but also for everyone else, society, the world. Perhaps the UN should develop World Equanimity Day. I don't think they have that. Sometimes they say World Peace Day, don't they? But peace in Buddhist terms has to be explained a bit. It's peace of equanimity, neither for nor against, just knowing things as impermanent, not self. So I'll leave you with these reflections tonight, and afterwards we have a chance, if anyone has any questions, can try and answer them for you.
Andamayang Dhammakataya Sadhukarang Dadamase Sadhu 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 Anumodami